Hello, my friends. How are you? Shall we continue with another story? Thank you for subscribing. Let's go. Before the first empire, before words, there was only sound. A sound so pure that it shaped mountains, awakened fire, and gave birth to time itself. What if I told you that this sound still exists? Hidden in ancient stones, in forgotten temples, and even within you. In the ancient civilizations of Africa, the gods did not speak as we do. Their voices were vibrations, waves that created realities, healed bodies, and opened portals. This was the primordial language, the divine word that united spirit and matter, man and cosmos. Over the millennia, it was fragmented, forbidden, and finally forgotten. But not all was lost. Today, symbols and inscriptions discovered in regions such as Kemet, Nubia, and Mali reveal traces of a wisdom far older than previously imagined, a language made of sound, light, and intention. Are we about to rediscover the language of the gods? Or is this the secret that history has chosen to keep silent? Perhaps the mystery lies not in the ruins, but in the memories that still resonate within humanity. And as the wind blows from the desert, carrying with it the echo of ancient chants, one question remains. Can we hear what the universe is still trying to tell us? Before we embark on this journey, tell me, are you already subscribed to the channel? If not, take advantage now. Subscribe, leave a like, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening to this ancient story. The journey is about to begin. The ancients say that, even before man erected temples or named the winds, there was only sound. A pure, vibrant sound that echoed in the heart of the universe and gave birth to what the eyes had never seen. It was the voice of the gods shaping the invisible, weaving worlds with the simple breath of the word. And it was from this divine sound that the first symbol came, not drawn, but felt, pulsating like the heart of creation. In those lands where the sun rises, gilding the skin of Africa, the verb was not just words, but life. Each whisper of the wind carried a hidden meaning, and each ray of light seemed to bear a sacred name. The elders said that the gods spoke through the elements, and man, attentive, simply listened. Until one day, wishing to record the sound of eternity, he began to draw the invisible upon the stone. Thus were born the first signs, the marks of the divine. They were not letters, but portals. They were not phrases, but spells of time. Each stroke held a memory of the dialogue between man and the cosmos, as if the entire universe breathed through these forms. Writing, then, became a bridge, and whoever crossed it understood the secret of creation. But as the centuries passed, this language began to fall silent. Man, engrossed in wars and kingdoms, forgot that the word was sacred. He began to use soulless words, and the original sound was lost in the sands of time. Still, they say that, beneath certain ancient stones, there are symbols that vibrate, awaiting the return of those who still know how to listen. And who knows, perhaps that primordial word still whispers in the silence of the ruins, waiting for someone to decipher its lost song. For when the word is rediscovered, creation, they say, will sing again. Long before the pyramids touched the sky, the lands of Africa already held the breath of wisdom. There, between the Nile and the golden mountains of the Green Sahara, humankind learned to converse with the gods through symbols. The stones, the rivers, and the wind were silent teachers, and each tribe saw in nature a hidden alphabet. It was not merely writing, but spiritual memory, a dialogue between the visible and the invisible. Ancient peoples called this art, listening to the world. They saw meaning in everything, in the flight of birds, in the curve of the moon, in the trail of sand after the rain. Each sign, each mark, was part of a cosmic language that connected humankind to the whole. It was there, in the beating heart of Africa, that the divine word took shape and color, even before being carved into the walls of temples. The banks of the Nile, bathed in gold and mystery, became humanity's first scroll. From there emerged priests and scribes who not only recorded facts but also translated celestial messages. It is said that each symbol was a spell of light, and that by tracing it, the scribe awakened ancient forces dormant within matter itself. Writing, then, was both science and magic. And it wasn't just Egypt that held such secrets. From the kingdom of Kush to the lands of Mali, ancient inscriptions told similar stories, uniting peoples through a language that spoke to the soul. It was the same sacred breath that guided kings, healers, and visionaries, all aware that the word possessed power. A power that created, healed, and transformed. Today, the ruins of these civilizations still whisper, in the engraved stones, in the chants of the griots, in the eyes of those who still remember. Africa was, and perhaps still is, the heart that taught the world to speak with the divine. But what happened to this sacred language? And who will dare to remember it? The priests said that hieroglyphs were not created, but revealed. Each stroke, each figure, was the echo of divine speech engraved in stone. Man did not invent these symbols. He only copied them, after hearing them in dreams, visions, or in the profound silence of the temples. When the scribe moved the chisel, he believed that his hand was guided by the gods, and that each symbol carried a fragment of celestial consciousness. Hieroglyphs were more than writing. They were the breath of the sacred. They didn't just describe things, but transmitted living forces. The all-seeing eye, the serpent that guarded time, the ankh that united heaven and earth. Everything had purpose and power. Each combination was like an ancient song, where sound and form danced in harmony. Deciphering them was touching the very heart of creation. The scribes, respected as masters of the word, did not write out of vanity or for record-keeping. They wrote to preserve the connection between man and the divine. When they wrote a name, they believed they gave it a soul. When they carved a prayer, they sealed eternal pacts between worlds. It was the language of the gods, and only the pure could wield it without losing themselves in the very light it emanated. In the temples, these symbols covered entire walls, as if the walls breathed mystery. And when the sun rose and its rays touched the hieroglyphs, the shadows danced, revealing new forms and meanings. The word became alive, pulsating, and time seemed to bow before its presence. It was there that man remembered who he was, part of the word, part of the divine. But one day, the winds changed, and the voice of the gods fell silent. The hieroglyphs were forgotten, covered by sand and centuries. Only echoes, fragments, and the feeling that something immense was lost remained. After all, what happens when humanity forgets the language of its own creator? Over the millennia, the sound of the gods began to fade. Man, thirsting for power and dominion, stopped listening to the wind and began to listen only to himself. The hands that once engraved the sacred word now wrote laws and wars. And little by little, the word, that which created and healed, was used to wound and divide. The divine silence, once full of meaning, transformed into oblivion. Cities grew, temples crumbled, and knowledge was locked away in vaults that few could open. The word, once a seed of light, became a tool of control. Symbols lost their essence and were translated soullessly, as if humanity had tried to capture the sacred in dead lines. Living language died, and with it, part of the human spirit. Still, some resisted. In deserts, forests, and mountains, sages and priestesses continued to chant the ancient words. They did not write them down, they felt them. They believed that the true sound of creation never disappears, only hides from distracted ears. These guardians of the word kept the flame of remembrance alive. But the following centuries were cruel to the sacred. Invasions and colonizations came, and forgetfulness became the rule. The African word was silenced, its scriptures called myth, and its wisdom labeled superstition. The modern world distanced itself from the spirit and embraced reason, without realizing that it was leaving behind the heart of its own language. Even so, in the subtext of history, there are signs that the divine word still breathes. In the chants of the villages, in the drums, in the whispered prayers at night, it manifests itself. Invisible, but alive. Perhaps, just waiting for the right moment to be heard again. Before Egypt established its dynasties and crowned its pharaohs, ancient kingdoms already existed, bathed in the same sun and guarded by the same mystery. Tesai, Nubia, and Tasseti, names that time has almost swallowed, flourished on the banks of the Nile when the world was still learning to name the sacred. There, men and women lived in harmony with the waters and the stars, believing that all life came from the same river that sprang from the heart of the earth. These peoples erected temples even before the pyramids, and their symbols carved in stone told stories of gods who walked among men. In Tesai, the priest spoke of spirits that dwelt in the storms. In Tasseti, it was believed that kings came from the sky, guided by lights that descended upon the desert at night. Nubia, with its gold and wisdom, became the mirror in which Egypt learned to see its own face. The inscriptions left on these lands reveal an ancient writing, older than hieroglyphs, made of intertwined spirals, serpents, and suns. Each symbol seemed to hold a spiritual message, a promise between man and the universe. They were not words to be read, but felt like melodies carved in stone. It was there, on the warm banks of the Nile, that the divine language began to take shape. The oral traditions of these people spoke of a voice of the water, a song that taught the rhythm of life and the secret of the stars. The oldest griots claimed that this voice came from before time, an echo left by the gods themselves, which men translated into symbols and sounds. Writing, therefore, was not born of necessity, but of reverence. It was humanity's attempt to answer the call of the cosmos. But time, merciless, has covered the traces of these kingdoms with sand. What remains are fragments, engraved stones, and the whisper of the wind that still blows among forgotten ruins. What if these first symbols are, in fact, the roots of the language of the gods? What if Africa, in silence, still holds the keys to the primordial word? The ancients called the sacred language Medu Neter, the words of the gods. It was not merely writing, it was vibration, power, breath, and enchantment. Each symbol represented a living force of nature, an energy that united heaven, earth, and spirit. When a priest pronounced the Medu Neter, it was believed that the universe itself responded, for the sound carried the same pulse that had created the world. The Medu Neter was not meant to be understood only by the mind, but felt by the heart. Scribes said that sound had a soul, and that the human voice, when in harmony with the divine, could move invisible mountains. Words were more than communication. They were portals. Each letter was an entity, each intonation a bridge between man and the gods. In the temples, the priests studied the word as one deciphers fire. They learned the value of each sound, the power of each breath. And when they wrote the name of a god, they did so with reverence, for they knew they were summoning his presence. For them, Medu Neter was the very fabric of reality, the thread that stitched together time and destiny. The walls of temples and tombs were not decorations, they were living messages, engraved so that the spirit would never forget the way back to its origin. It is said that, by chanting certain combinations of symbols, portals opened in the invisible world, revealing visions and memories of the cosmos. It was the language that united the visible and the eternal. But, as the centuries passed, the Medu Neter was translated, corrupted, stripped of its sacred vibration. Writing became art, then record, and finally, just history. However, those who hear the sound of the wind between the ancient columns still swear they hear the echo of the words of the gods. An ancient call that has never ceased. The ancients knew that each symbol had its own soul. It wasn't just a drawing, it was a living entity, pulsating with invisible energy. The all-seeing eye, the scarab that is reborn, the ankh that unites worlds. All vibrated like threads of light between man and the divine. For the initiated, deciphering a symbol was to touch the very breath of the gods, to feel the power that runs behind the form. These symbols were not created by chance. They were revelations. Each line and each curve possessed rhythm, harmony, and intention. The priests affirmed that the gods drew through men, and that, by contemplating a hieroglyph, the spirit could awaken memories of other lives, of other realms. It was the power of the invisible acting on the visible, transforming stone into vibration. It is said that in the temples of Karnak and Luxor, when the sun rose and its rays touched the walls, the symbols came to life. The shadows seemed to dance, creating forms that only the pure of heart could interpret. Light and shadow became part of the sacred text, revealing meanings that changed according to the day, the weather, and the perspective. The scribes understood the language of energies. They knew that a wrong word could alter the balance of the cosmos. Therefore, each symbol was drawn with controlled breathing, in a state of devotion. The art of writing was, above all, a ritual. Man became a channel, and the symbol, a bridge between worlds. But today, when we look at these ancient forms, we see only art, not energy. Perhaps that's why the modern world seems so silent. After all, what if these symbols still pulsate, waiting for someone to see in them again what time has tried to erase? In ancient temples, writing was a divine act. No one dared to trace a symbol without first purifying body and soul. The scribe, before touching the brush, would dip his hands in Nile water and breathe in the secret name of Mot, the goddess of truth and harmony. For each written line was an offering, and each word, a mirror of the cosmos. To write without purity was to profane the sacred, and the gods, it was said, saw everything. During the rituals, the priests chanted songs that awakened the symbols. The temple walls vibrated, as if the stones responded to human voices. It was the perfect union between sound and form, word and spirit. Each hieroglyph was a key, and together they formed portals of energy. The initiates believed that, by writing, they were not only recording, but summoning the divine. In certain ceremonies, inscriptions were made on papyrus sheets, then burned to release the message into the invisible world. The fire transformed the word into light, and the smoke carried the prayers to the gods. There were rituals in which the ink was mixed with gold, olive oil, and powdered sacred stones, symbolizing the marriage between matter and spirit. Nothing was random. Each gesture was a link between the human and the eternal. On full moon nights, the scribes gathered in silence, surrounded by torches, and traced words that could only be read under the moonlight. It was the moment when the veil between the worlds became thin, and the symbols, alive. The gods, they believed, watched, breathing through the words that were born. But, with time, the rituals ceased. Man forgot the power of each stroke, each corner, each breath. Only silent walls remained, engraved with prayers that no one understands anymore. And yet, when the wind blows through the ruins, some say the walls whisper. Before the first temple was erected and before men named the stars, there was only sound. A deep sound, without origin or end, vibrating in the heart of the void. Ancient African traditions called this sound Aum Toro, the divine breath that awakens matter and gives form to consciousness. The priests taught that all creation began with a vibration, a primordial word, and that hieroglyphs were humanity's attempt to capture that sound in visible form, to freeze the echo of the gods in stone. Each symbol, therefore, was not just a letter, but a spiritual note, a frequency capable of moving the energy of the universe. In ancient Kemet, scribes believed that speech shaped reality. To speak is to create, the initiates said. Therefore, the gods spoke the world into existence, and humans, by learning their language, became co-creators. The sacred texts were more than prayers. They were vibrational formulas that awakened invisible forces. In some mystery schools, it was taught that the right sound could open portals, cure illnesses, and alter destinies. Each word had a soul, and pronouncing it unconsciously was like summoning thunder. Sound was not just communication, it was power. Over the millennia, the sacred language was corrupted, translated, diluted. The word became noise, and the echo of the gods fell silent. But the symbols still hold memory. When someone observes them in silence, with reverence and intention, something awakens. The ancient sound of creation vibrates again, within the one who listens with the spirit, and not just with the ears. Some believe that Africa existed in isolation, as a continent apart from the ancient world. But the winds and tides tell a different story. The sands of the Sahara hold traces of caravans that crossed deserts even before writing was invented. And ancient sages affirmed that African knowledge sailed far beyond its shores, reaching distant lands and minds thirsting for wisdom. In Egyptian temples, there are inscriptions that speak of peoples coming from the west, bearers of gold and mysteries. In the heart of Nubia, archaeologists have found objects that combine Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and even Amerindian styles. How to explain this? Perhaps the ancient masters understood that the sea does not separate, it connects, and that the stars were bridges, not borders. The priests of Ifa, the scribes of Kemet, and the astronomers of Nubia shared something in common: respect for the cycle of life and the power of cosmic vibration. They knew that each civilization was a reflection of the same primordial light, manifesting itself with different names, but with an identical essence. Some ancient texts mention visitors who came from the other side of the world, seeking the secret of vital energy and knowledge of spiritual resurrection. Africa, they say, was the cradle and destination of every sacred journey. There, travelers found the beginning and the end of all stories. But as the ages passed, these connections were broken, silenced by empires and forgetfulness. Only symbols, songs, and ruins remain, clues to a past that refuses to disappear. And perhaps, in the sands where time has fallen asleep, there is still a message waiting to be deciphered. It is said that, when the world was still young and the gods walked among men, there existed beings known as the guardians of time. They did not reign over kingdoms or armies, but over silence and memory. They were masters of word and sound, capable of preserving history with only the echo of their voices. Their dwellings were hidden in quartz caves and submerged temples, where time dared not touch. These guardians believed that the past and the future were intertwined threads, and that whoever knew how to listen to them could understand the destiny of civilizations. They used symbols engraved in stone and song, in rituals that resembled dances, but were maps of time. Each movement, each sound, opened invisible portals, where forgotten memories could be seen as reflections in the water. The earliest accounts describe them as travelers between ages, bearers of the gods' wisdom, transmitters of the primordial language. It was this language that guided kings and priests, inspired prophets and healers. But, as the centuries progressed, their teachings were fragmented, lost amidst wars, invasions, and rewritings of history. Some say that the guardians still speak, in the voices of the griots and in the melodies of the drums that echo under the moon. That their stories never ceased, they only changed form. And when someone listens with their heart, without haste and without fear, time opens again, revealing what was hidden beneath the veil of the ages. Perhaps the true legacy of these guardians lies not in the stones, but in the living memory that persists within each being who seeks to understand what came before. And it is at this point, where time seems to breathe, that another mystery begins to unfold. Some say that before writing, even before words, there existed the divine sound, a pure vibration that gave form to matter and meaning to spirit. The ancients called it the voice of the invisible. It was the breath that shaped mountains, that awakened fire, and made the river remember its course. This force, they say, was the true language of the gods, not spoken, but felt. In the lands of the Nile and the deserts of Nubia, priests trained for years to listen to the hidden sound among the waves of the wind. They believed that each sound possessed a creative power, and that pronouncing certain syllables could open paths between the world of men and that of spirits. These sacred sounds would, in time, become the basis of hieroglyphs, each symbol a note in the divine symphony. The echoes of this vibration traveled through temples, caves, and hearts. When drums resonated in ancient ceremonies, they were not merely instruments, they were portals. Each beat recalled the primordial sound, reminding humankind that the entire universe is made of rhythm. Thus, music, speech, and writing became reflections of the same sacred source. But time, ever hungry, tried to extinguish the sound. Languages died, symbols were broken, and the divine vibration fell silent. Still, there are those who hear, in African chants, in Yoruba rituals, in the winds of the Sahara, echoes of a language that no modern translation can contain. And if that sound still vibrates in the depths of the world, perhaps it is the key to deciphering the lost language of the gods, a secret that only the most attentive will be able to hear when silence finally speaks. When night fell upon the desert, the ancients raised their eyes and saw more than mere points of light. They believed that each star was a word, each constellation a phrase written by the gods in the firmament. The sky was a living scroll, and the movement of the stars, divine calligraphy revealing secrets to those who knew how to read the infinite. The priests of ancient Kemet, shrouded in linen robes and silence, observed the firmament with devotion. From there came omens, instructions, and coded messages. The position of the stars guided the construction of temples, the cycle of harvests, and even the paths of the soul after death. For them, understanding the stars was deciphering the will of the gods. But there was something beyond astrology. They said the stars spoke in vibrations, emitting sounds that only the spirit could hear. Each glimmer was a whisper, an ancestral call. Hieroglyphs, according to ancient traditions, were born from this listening. Scribes tried to translate into stone what the sky said in light. However, as the ages passed, this knowledge was corrupted or forgotten. Humanity learned to observe the brilliance, but not to listen to the song. The sky, then, became merely scenery, not a message. And what was revelation transformed into mystery, an open book that no one knew how to read anymore. Still, there are nights when the wind changes and the silence seems to vibrate. At those times, they say the sky speaks again, and that those who look with a pure heart can perceive that the language of the gods is still written up there, waiting to be remembered. In the heart of the ancient lands, monuments stood that seemed to sleep under the weight of centuries. Stone circles, obelisks, and subterranean chambers. But the wise men affirmed that nothing there was dead. Each stone was alive, pulsating with an inaudible sound, and together they formed portals between worlds. When the wind passed through them, a melody resonated, echoing the voice of creation. These structures, they say, were not erected solely through physical force, but through frequency and harmony. The ancients mastered the secret of vibration. They knew how to move blocks weighing tons simply by chanting in unison. Sound, when pure, altered the density of matter. And so, the temples arose not through the imposition of man upon nature, but through the communion between the two. Each stone held symbols, not only engraved on its surface, but imprinted in its vibration. They were languages read with the spirit, not with the eyes. On certain nights, when the stars aligned above the monoliths, the air became light, and an invisible presence seemed to traverse time. It was the awakening of the portals. Some believed that these places connected the physical world to the spiritual one, that gods, ancestors, and guardians of lost knowledge passed through them. The voices echoed like distant chants, reminding us that every stone was one sound, and every sound was once a divine word. Today, many of these monuments still stand, silent. But who knows? Perhaps they are just waiting for someone to pronounce the right tone again, the one that opens the portals and awakens the lost language that sleeps within the stone. Ages ago, when the boundary between heaven and earth was still tenuous, the gods descended in human form to walk among the people. Stories tell that they came not to dominate, but to teach, bringing with them the gift of words and symbols, so that humanity could understand the divine. It was in that time that sound became word, and word power. The ancients believed that each god carried a fragment of the original language, the same language that created the universe. The gods of Kemet, Nubia, and Ife spoke through rituals, music, and dreams. The priests, upon hearing their voices, translated them into hieroglyphs, paintings, and legends. Thus was born the link between man and the eternal, a bridge made of sound and light. There were ceremonies in which the people believed they could feel the divine presence. The air changed, the drums pulsed in the same rhythm as the heart, and human eyes saw more than what was visible. In that instant, man and God became one, united by the sacred vibration, the same vibration that the guardians called the language of the beginning. But as the ages passed, man began to forget. He began to seek power without reverence, sound without listening, words without soul. And the gods, saddened, withdrew into the invisible realm, taking with them part of the language that sustained the harmony of the world. Still, they say they never truly left. Sometimes, in the whispers of the wind, in dreams, or in the sound of drums, the voice of the gods returns, as if the universe were trying to remind man of the language he himself helped to forget. Among the forgotten deserts and valleys of ancient Africa, there were temples that guarded what the wise men called books of stone and light. They were not made of paper or parchment, but of blocks of granite and crystal, engraved with symbols that gleamed in the sun. Each hieroglyph was a mirror, reflecting both the word and the spirit of the one who read it. These books didn't just tell stories. They were maps of the invisible, guides to understanding the origin of life, the energy of the stars, and the eternal cycle between body and soul. The priest said that whoever deciphered their codes could speak the language of the gods again, not with their mouths, but with an awakened heart. The scribes worked at night, under the gaze of the constellations, for they believed that the light of the stars activated the secrets hidden in the stones. When the first ray of moonlight touched the hieroglyphs, they shone as if breathing. It was the moment when the gods read back the human words, a silent dialogue between heaven and earth. Over the centuries, many of these temples were buried by time, their inscriptions shattered or erased. However, some tribes and priestly lineages kept the memory of the books alive, not in objects, but in chants, rites, and oral traditions that resonate to this day. Perhaps these books never truly disappeared. Perhaps they are scattered within us, waiting for the right gaze and the right voice to awaken once more the words of light that once illuminated the world. The ancients believed that dreams were the shortest path between man and the gods. During sleep, the soul was freed from the body and traveled through invisible realms, where time did not exist and the past mingled with the future. It was in this state that the ancestors spoke, revealing secrets that wakefulness did not allow one to understand. In many African civilizations, dreaming was a sacred gift. Priests taught that each dream carried a coded message, a fragment of ancestral memory, as if the universe itself whispered memories of past lives. Dreams were studied, narrated, and even drawn, as it was believed that they contained spiritual instructions left by the gods. Some sages claimed that the lost language of the gods was not in temples or scriptures, but in the human subconscious, dormant within each being. When someone dreamed of symbols, animals, or strange sounds, it was the echo of that language trying to manifest itself. It was the divine reminding man of what he had forgotten. Sleep rituals were profound. In certain villages, people slept on special stones, believing they captured the earth's energy and amplified spiritual vision. Gentle chants were sung to guide the soul during sleep, and dawn was a rebirth, a return from the invisible world with new fragments of wisdom. Perhaps the gods never stopped speaking. Perhaps they only changed their language, and now they speak to us through the silence of dreams. Among the shadows of time, stories emerge about mysterious beings known as guardians of forbidden knowledge. They were men and women who had crossed the boundary of the visible and returned with truths the world was not ready to hear. Their words carried such profound power that the mere sound of their voices could alter the destiny of a kingdom. It was said that these guardians were chosen by the gods themselves, marked by luminous signs on their bodies and revealing dreams. They spent years in isolation, studying forgotten stones, sounds, and symbols, until their minds became mirrors of ancestral wisdom. They were masters of silence, for they knew that not all revelation should be spoken. Some need to be lived. Legends say that they hid scrolls, artifacts, and inscriptions in sacred places, protected by riddles and chants. Anyone who tried to steal this knowledge without purity of heart was driven to madness or oblivion. Thus, the knowledge remained veiled, awaiting the right time to emerge again into the light. Many believe that these guardians still exist, mingled with the common people. Griots, elders, healers, silent masters who preserve fragments of the ancient language in the form of stories, songs, and advice. They guard what the world has forgotten, waiting for someone who knows how to listen. And perhaps, when humanity is ready to understand the power hidden within words, the guardians will reveal themselves, bringing back the echo of the language of the gods. It is said that, long before borders and empires, the winds of the Sahara already carried an ancient prophecy, whispered in grains of sand, heard only by those who knew how to listen to the silence. This prophecy spoke of a time when man would forget the language of the gods, and the world would plunge into the confusion of soulless words. It would be the beginning of the great age of forgetfulness. The desert priests called this revelation the Song of the Sands. They said it was written not on papyrus, but in the movement of the dunes. Each shift in shape was a phrase, each storm a warning. Nature, in its silent dance, tried to remind humanity of the power it had lost. On nights when the full moon illuminated the desert, the wise men gathered around the fire to decipher the invisible chant. Some claimed to hear voices coming from the wind, calling for the return of the ancient word. Others saw signs in the stars, as if the gods themselves were watching, awaiting the moment when the word would be remembered. Over the centuries, the prophecy has been fragmented, distorted, and even ridiculed. But it has never completely disappeared. From time to time, it resurfaces, in dreams, in visions, in archaeological discoveries that defy logic. As if the desert still held, beneath its dunes, the last verse of the divine song. And some say that when humanity rediscovers this verse, the primordial sound will once again echo throughout the world, uniting heaven, earth, and spirit in a single voice. The voice that shaped everything that exists. They say that when the world becomes too noisy, the sacred chooses silence to speak again. And it is in this silence that many feel the awakening of the lost language of the gods. It doesn't emerge in books or temples, but in simple gestures, in ancient chants, in the beating of hearts that still remember what time tried to erase. It is a subtle but inevitable return, like the dawn that conquers the night. Scholars today find in African ruins symbols that are repeated in civilizations around the world. In the inscriptions of Kemet, in the drawings of the Dogon, in the stones of Ethiopia, there is a common echo, a universal language, made of sound, light, and intention. A reminder that humanity has always spoken the same language, but has forgotten to listen. The griots, storytellers, claim that this language was never lost. It merely hid within each human being, awaiting the moment when the spirit would remember. Every drumbeat, every prayer, every word spoken with truth is a fragment of this sacred language reborn in the present. Perhaps the return is not an event, but a collective awakening. A reminder that every word has power, that every sound carries life, and that when we speak from the heart, the gods hear us. The lost language, then, does not belong to the past. It is the future itself calling to us. And when the world finally understands this calling, the veil will fall. What was myth will become memory, and what was forgotten will once again be sacred. For the word of the gods never died, it only waited for the right moment to be heard again. When the last symbol fades into the sands of time, the voice of the gods does not die, it merely falls silent within us. For the true divine language was never written in stone, but engraved in the vibration of the human soul. Every word we utter, every sound that echoes from the heart, carries the same creative energy that ancient priests used to move mountains and invoke the heavens. Hieroglyphs were more than writing, they were portals. Each stroke, a spell. Each sound, a spark of power. Today, when we look at these forgotten inscriptions, we are not merely searching for the past. We are searching for the memory of who we truly were. Perhaps the gods have not disappeared. Perhaps they have simply fallen silent, waiting for humanity to remember once more the language that speaks to the infinite. And when the wind sweeps through the ruins of Kemet, whispering between the pillars of time, it brings not only dust and mystery, it brings a call. An invitation to awaken the word that sleeps within each of us. Because the language of the gods was never lost. It only waits for man to listen again.